This video is going to cover a handful of watercolor techniques. You should start by dividing your paper into 12 squares and labeling it like you see. You can use the paint and brush like we used yesterday. You'll have your water and paper towels. And then I'm going to talk about a different brush and a different kind of paint. So we also have these sets with these water brush pens where the water is actually stored in the base of the brush, and you separate it and fill that end up with water and screw it back on. And it's a little bit easier because you can just push it and it will drop some water down into the end of the brush, and so it's pretty convenient. And they can be nice to use when you figure them out. I'll still use that water cup even if I'm using that, though, as you'll see. And then some of the other things I'm going to need for those squares on the bottom: resist, straw, sticks, and tubes. And so you can see I'm laying them down where they're going to be. And this is all my materials right there. So once you get set up, you can go ahead and get started following along with this. And I'm just going to start up in the top and work my way down. So the first thing I'm doing is flat wash. And for a flat wash, I want to try to make sure I get as even as an application as possible. So I don't want there to be areas of more color or more water, and I don't want my brush strokes to be evident. So I just want it to be an even, flat application of color. And something that you might have to do is reach back to your paint and grab some more color. If it starts to get too light, then you can grab some more color and darken it up a little bit. If it is too dark in an area, you can just go back and forth across the transitional area to try to even it out. You may need to grab some more water, though you do want to be careful with that, because if you use too much water, you might get pools that will build up, and when they dry, it'll look very uneven. Now for this next one, I'm going to do a gradient, and a gradient means it's going to go from dark to light. So the bottom is going to be very dark, or it's going to use a lot of pigment, and then as I go up, as I get lighter, I'm going to want to use more water to help desaturate it. So I'm just filling in a nice chunk, a nice block of really saturated color, and then I'm actually going to use water from the cup over there. So I'll dip the brush and just go over that top edge of the saturated, and you can see how it's one step lighter, and then I just repeat it. I clean it off again, get some more water, and it will get one step lighter once again. And now I'm just going to try to even out these transitions a little bit and go over them back and forth, work my way through the top. And you can see how I'm getting that transition going from a very saturated darker blue to a lighter blue, and then at the top it's barely changing the color of the paper. It's just a very subtle tint of blue at the top. Now for color to color, it's essentially the same thing. I go from a saturated and then I'm desaturating it with water as I go up, but instead of going to white, it's going to go into another color. So I'm going to have a strip of color at the bottom and then a strip of a different color at the top. So I'm starting with blue at the bottom, just like I did with gradient right here. And I'm going to block in that little rectangle of saturated blue, and then I'll clean my brush off and pick up a different color. And you can choose whichever color you want to. And so I'm going with purple, and I load my brush up, going back and forth and making sure that the paint fills up the brush, and I'm doing a rectangle right on top of it here. Now I'm basically going to do the steps that I did to achieve the gradient on each color so that they blend together. So I clean the brush off, I get some water, I go over that edge of purple, I bring it down, and then I'm going to repeat it and do the same thing to blue. I get some water and I go over it, and it was starting to dry, and a little bit of water will kind of wake it back up. And then I'm just going to go back and forth over this transition area a couple times to make sure I got a really smooth transition and that you don't have a quick drop off from one color to the next. And you can see where this might be useful in a painting. You could get some really cool effects for like a sunset. Looking back one at the gradient, you could imagine where that would be necessary, and pretty much anything where you're trying to show form, anything that has a shadow, and with a darker area and a lighter area, you're going to want to use a gradient. Now this next one is wet on wet. Two different ways to do it. So you can see I'm squeezing that pen and I'm getting drops of water to come out. So there's not a lot of pigment besides what was left over in it. And so I'm putting that water down and now I'll drop pigment into the water and watch how it diffuses. And you can get some really cool effects there. And I'm kind of squeezing the brush as I go too. And then another way to do wet on wet would be to lay down a section of color of that is a little wetter than normal so that there still is a bit of standing water, and then drop a different pigment, a different color in it, like I grabbed blue for example, and then the blue will kind of diffuse into the purple, and again creating a really cool effect. And I'm just having a bit of fun here, messing around with the designs, making little squiggles. Don't really know if it's anything in particular, but uh, I encourage you to do the same. Maybe try to turn some of these squares into something fun, or just experiment a little bit. And that's really all this exercise is getting some practice with the new medium, watercolor, and just doing a little bit of experimenting with different types of techniques, and trying to get a handle on ways to use watercolor, some of the possibilities when you're actually working in a painting. So for dry brush, I had to make sure that my brush is really dry. There's just enough water in it to pick up the paint, to move it around, but it's dry enough so that the bristles of the brush are showing up on the paper. And you can kind of see how this technique could be useful in a painting. This would make great foliage, great grass, trees, bushes, that type of stuff, and many other things as well. But I just thought of grass when I think of dry brush, and that's why I grabbed that green. And I'm kind of just filling in the background again, thinking of how I could use it in a painting and having a little bit of fun with it. And I jump over to glaze too, because I will need those green marks to dry to be able to do the glaze technique. So I just got to do that a couple ahead so that by the time I get to it, it'll be dry. All right, I'm moving on to lift. I'm grabbing a sky blue color here, and you'll see why in a second. So to start, I'm getting a flat wash basically. I'm using a bit of water so that it moves around pretty easily, and just going back and forth, getting a flat wash. It can be a bit of a gradient too, which mine kind of ends up here a gradient anyways. But the important part here is that it's wet enough so that when I dab it with a paper towel, that it picks up the paint. And you can see that this could be a great technique for clouds, maybe, or helping create some other sort of gradient or kind of texture of lights and darks. And I'm just going back in and filling in a little bit of darker blue and continuing with that cloud effect. And so I kind of got a landscape going here, right? I got the sky with the lift. I got the color, a sunset with the color to color. Got the grass with the dry brush, gradient to show form, and just be thinking about how these different techniques, how you can use these different techniques. For splatter, I got to get a lot of pigment and water because it's got to shoot off the end of my brush. Now, if I just started splattering, it would go everywhere. You don't want to do that if you are working on a finished drawing, and it would mess up maybe like a detailed area or something like that. So perhaps you could put down some scrap paper, tape it down, and give yourself an area to work inside of, like I did right here. And I'm holding it, and then I'm gently flicking the end of the brush, and you can turn it, and you'll see how that will change the direction that the splatter is coming off of. This is a really fun technique to do. There's a handful of applications that it could be useful for, organic kind of splattering of different designs. And I'm just having a little bit of fun here and trying some different colors. I grabbed a darker maroon color and grabbing a yellow now, and just kind of mixing them over each other. And so you can see where you could get maybe like a speckled kind of sand texture from this one too. All right, and now I'm on a glaze, and remember this is the one that I did a little bit earlier and hoping that it would dry, and so before I'm doing it I just kind of test it, touch it, and looked at my finger there and it was good. So I'm ready to glaze it. Now glaze just means a layer of color over the background, and you can kind of see how those marks show through the red. The green or the marks, they don't disappear. They're still there, and they're peeking through the red. You don't necessarily see the green, but depending on the color combination that you use, you could get an interesting effect by having that bottom color show through the top glaze, especially if the glaze is really light. I used kind of a darker red glaze, but you can get a variety of different effects from that. So onto this bottom row. This bottom row is when I have to bring in all those other materials. So the resist, I'm working with that white pencil. I made a little smiley face, and I'm making some white kind of uh, dots and lines, and I'm gonna maybe turn it into some foliage or some flowers. We'll see how it goes. I grab green again for here, and you can see how when I go over, my little smiley face pokes through there. There's some of those dots and stuff that I made. Now I just connect some of these dots, and it's a really rough version, but you can see how you can use this resist whenever you need there to be a white area or a highlight to remain, because watercolor, you can't really go back with a white watercolor. You could go back with a white marker or acrylic paint, but one of the easiest ways to keep areas of your paper white is to use some sort of resist technique, and the one that we're doing is with these white pencils, and it's a really easy way to do it. I think it's really easy to control where the white goes to, as opposed to like a masking fluid. So that's what we're doing. Now straw, I need some blobs. I need some dots of paint that I can blow around with a straw. So I made some drops there. I grabbed my straw. Something to think about is when you put that straw up to your mouth, make sure that you're not breathing when you get too close to the paper, because you'll suck it right up. And I've definitely seen that happen a couple times. So make sure that all your air is going out through the end of the straw. And I'm just blowing it around here. Very organic. You don't have a ton of control over this, so you don't necessarily want to do this like in a tightly detailed area where you need a lot of control. Organic things where it doesn't really matter, like tree branches, maybe coral or other organic type of things like that. This is a really good technique for. Now, onto sticks, they're kind of like these pastels or like crayons, and I'm doing a color-to-color gradient with the sticks. So on the one end, I push pretty hard and have it blocked in, pretty solid red, pretty solid orange on the two ends, and then they kind of overlap, where I did a little less pressure and had a combination of the two colors, and that way it'll help me get a gradient. So I clean my brush off so that I don't bring too much orange over to the other side, and then just go back and forth, and there I get a different way to do a color to color. You could use them for any way that you want to add color, but let's just do the color to color for the sticks on this worksheet here. Now the tubes, I showed you real quick there. Those are excellent for different types of pigment that maybe you can't find or you can't mix. I have a yellow ochre here, which is a really common one if you're doing any sort of landscape painting. And I drop down just a little bit. You really don't need much. And I just pull off the edge of it. You can see how much is still left over right there. So a little bit of this paint goes a long ways. So try not to overdo it. Don't pour out more than you need, especially for this worksheet where you need almost nothing. And that's about it for instruction. So make sure that you clean up, you clean the brush off good, use water, pull all of the pigment out of the end. We want to keep these brushes in good shape. So wash these good, wash your trays out, and you should be good. So go ahead, get started. Happy painting.